May 29th, 2024. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, not as usual, filling in for Mr. Hannaford. I've got Western Standard news editor Dave Naylor. Welcome to The Pipeline, Dave.
Thanks. Good to be back.
But still, here as usual, Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan. Thanks for being here, Cory.
Oh, always happy to appear.
All right. Well, we've got great topics on the show today. The genocide scam. I think yesterday marked 3 years since the shocking revelation of unmarked, 200 to 300 unmarked graves at a former residential school near Kamloops in British Columbia. It's been 3 years. That's a lot of time to dig up the bodies. And how many bodies have they found? No bodies. 0 bodies have been found at any of these so-called mass graves located across Canada. So we're going to talk about the moral panic, the national meltdown that we have, flags flying at half-mast for nearly half a year over this stuff, and the very quiet shrinking away of Canada's legacy media and progressive political parties from what has proven to be a pretty embarrassing non-genocide. We're going to talk about Justin Trudeau's $12 million deer hunting trip that you are not invited to. That's right, Justin Trudeau has paid $12 million for Americans and New Zealanders to come to Canada and shoot deer from helicopters with guns that are now illegal for you to use in deer hunting. Apparently never occurred to him to just talk to the BC government and issue a special tag for these deer. Could have dealt with the problem in, I don't know, an afternoon for precisely $0 to cost of the taxpayer. The Alberta NDP leadership race is entering its final stretch just a little less than a month from now, June 22nd, I believe. Alberta new NDP members are going to be voting on who their next Naheed Nenshi will be. Back to the federal government, the Liberals have originally said they're going to bring in 1,000 Gaza refugees. Then they upped that to 5,000, so 5 times over. And then they just said now it's 5,000 families. Well, we've had experience with this kind of thing before. We remember the so-called Syrian refugee crisis that swamped Europe with a bunch of 20-something men not bringing their families in most cases, overrunning much of Europe, and many of them not having ever been to Syria in their lives. So that's where we're going to get into today. So we'll start with the genocide scam. So 3 years ago yesterday, one of the First Nations in the Kamloops area had performed some ground radar penetration and said that it found circa 250 odd unmarked graves. Now, I took it pretty seriously when this came out. We know that residential schools, for the most part, were not very great places to be. Many of these kids were scooped up from their families without that family's permission. Some kids were sent there with their family's blessing. But overall, these were generally not great places to be. Fairly often abuse. But we had, coming from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, language had already been started to be used, bending around some pretty powerful words like genocide. That was already pretty crazy. But the announcement of 250 odd unmarked graves of children sparked overnight a national outcry. And if so, it certainly would have been a shameful part of history that would have to be accounted for. These places were often very overrun with tuberculosis. There was certainly some people probably died in abuse, but more likely they'd be dying just because of bad conditions like tuberculosis, things like that. But then, it was straight on to the genocide bandwagon, a narrative that the federal government itself has bought into. And Justin Trudeau orders that the Canadian flag flying on the Peace Tower on Parliament Hill fly at half-mast. And it stayed there all the way until Remembrance Day, when the absurdity of flying this thing at half-mast for 5 months without yet a shred of proof became absurd. So, Dave, before we get into the media backing away from this and whatnot, what was the main reaction to this? Maybe just try to capture for us, summarize for us the national moral panic that set in, the national self-shaming ritual that Canada went through.
Well, that's what it is. It was like a feeling of national shame. Went on for, I guess it's been going on for 3 years now. 3 years to the day this week that, as you say, the first allegations of unmarked graves came out.
They didn't use the word alleged at the time.
No, it was, and neither did the legacy media at the time. Some foreign media kind of questioned it, but certainly not any of the Canadian legacy media. And this haven't found a single thing, as you know, and as we'll talk about. But the ludicrousness continued this week with the Indigenous chief that represents all of BC saying the bodies couldn't be found because they were incinerated. They were put in incinerators.
No mention of, well, then what are these unmarked graves?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Just couldn't be found because they were incinerated. And another BC Native leader came out just yesterday and said that, well, the bodies couldn't be found because the missionaries and the nuns actually took them off-site and disposed of the bodies off-site and just left them to rot. So certainly the Indigenous folks aren't really backing down. They've changed a little bit of their wording. But, it still affects Canada to this day with more land acknowledgements than we ever had. We've got the National Day of Mourning, which is a stat holiday for federal workers. So it has left a lasting stain across the country, without a doubt.
Cory, Dave, we're now seeing these almost silly excuses. Well, they're taken off site, they are incinerated, but zero actions to even paper over their claims that were quite categorical. They were not, well, we think they might be unmarked graves. And I was open to the possibility, certainly open to the possibility. These are not good places for the most part. And, but no attempt to account for, well, what about your claim that these are very large, sometimes they would even use the word mass graves. There was never actually any indication ever of mass graves. We have images, I guess, of like Khmer Rouge or the Belsen concentration camps, things like that. But no accounting of, well, what are these alleged sites then? They've just now dismissed and say, well, the murders were there. There were murders. The bodies were disposed of otherwise. Okay, well, your key evidence was these so-called unmarked graves. Tell me about the unmarked graves. Has there been any attempt to explain, well, what these things were then?
Not to my knowledge, and they don't want to know. I mean,
3 years is a lot of money, and they haven't dug anything up.
This is as simple as taking a spade, a handful of people going out to even one of the anomalies found by the radar and digging a hole. That's really all it comes down to. You don't need years. They got $7.9 million to do this, which they haven't answered what they've done with that $7.9 million, but it wasn't digging. Mm-hmm. The other part that people gloss over is that, and I think that's where some people are realizing there's probably nothing in these. There were meticulous records kept. That's how the Catholic Church was paid. They knew where the children were, if children passed away, where they would be buried, there were records. There's no records of any 200 and some children disappearing in Kamloops. There's no family saying my cousin, my brother, my whatever disappeared in this school. That there's no evidence whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Because again, even if there were bodies and if you exhume them, well, we want to return them to the families so they can be properly interred. Well, you don't have any families raising their hands saying, I wonder where little Susie went.
Because we could easily DNA test this stuff and say, okay, well, this was someone who was lost and they're part of your family. Let's give them a proper burial on a marked grave.
I think where finally things were starting to get muted. They start doing the research and realize that there's really unlikely there's any bodies in this thing. Plus, a lot of other studies were coming up showing that there'd been past excavations that had never found things there before. There'd been an apple orchard. There'd been septic tiles put down there. There were a whole lot of things under that ground that if you're going to do a radar survey would show anomalies, but there's
At the end of the day, you got to dig it up.
no evidence of a grave.
And we got to remember, Dave, that it wasn't just Kamloops. Kamloops was kind of the starting gun on this thing, but then there was a bunch of claims elsewhere. I know there was one First Nation in Saskatchewan. I can't recall them. They were much more cautious and reasonable about it. They used much less inflammatory language to their credit. They used photo radar, ground penetrative radar, and they found some anomalies. And they said, could be something here. Let's look into it. And that was to their credit. And so there's no egg on their face. I think they were full well within their rights to say, I think we should look into this. And we looked into it and turned out it was not. So good on them. They were cautious. They didn't try to jump on a hype bandwagon. But, there is a lasting legacy in this. We had hundreds of burned churches across Canada. And Trudeau and the federal government's only result was, well, it's understandable that they're angry. Well, no, it's not, because the federal government fanned that anger in its kind of postmodern style that Canada is an inherently evil and genocidal country, because they bought into the Truth and Reconciliations Commission's language on this. We had more places of worship burned in that period of time than any time and period since Kristallnacht in 1939. And we didn't even have a word of condemnation from the federal government. So there's a lasting legacy to this, Dave.
Sure.
How's Ottawa going to wrestle with this now
Well,
that it's essentially been completely debunked?
Well, I think they're just going to go quiet on it. Cory will tell you the reaction to his tweets in the last little while. And don't forget, we even had the Pope. Those images of the Pope in his wheelchair, asking for forgiveness and expressing his regrets and stuff like that. So it was a worldwide story. And, we're going to have Truth and Reconciliation Day every year. If they never find bodies, do they revoke the holiday? It's just going to be a tangled mess.
It's a good time for surfing.
Yes, good time for surfing in Tofino. Hopefully, maybe by the end of next year, he'll be surfing full time there. What a mess! What a mess! Your Twitter followers have gone silent.
Well, yeah, that was the interesting thing, because I like everybody else, I was horrified when I first heard it. Like, oh my God, everybody thinks that same instinct. Children murdered. That's the worst thing in the world we could ever imagine. And I was, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's get exhuming. Let's see if we can find the perpetrators or just
some of them should have been still alive. It was happening in the 60s.
And that's part of why I'm as upset as I am now, because nobody likes being fooled. And as the evidence kept coming in, so then once I started questioning and others online, I used to get just attacked. There's nothing
they call you a denier, as
like
you're like Ernst Zundel saying the Holocaust didn't happen.
But I've been more vocal than ever this last couple of weeks, and you know what? They're quiet. They're not coming at me anymore. There's a handful, but I'm not getting. They're just. You used the analogy earlier. It's like Homer Simpson. Just I'm going to sink back into the trees now, because I hate to say it, but it sounds like Morgan might be onto something.
And don't forget, the Liberals were considering making it a crime.
Yeah, they considered making this a crime.
Residential school denialism, right? Well, okay, show us a body, and then I'll agree with you. But until
show me one body.
Exactly. Right now, I'm going to be a denier until they can show me a body,
or at least a skeptic. That's a fair term. Like skeptic. We got to see some evidence, guys. It's time.
Yeah, so we'll just kind of wrap this part of the discussion up with the legacy media's treatment of it. So they took it as gospel out of the gate. It was certainly newsworthy to report on. This was a claim coming. It was newsworthy to report on, but they didn't say alleged unmarked graves or suspected. They have located unmarked graves. They took it uncritically whatsoever. And I think it was City TV. City TV had the biggest screw up yesterday on the 3rd anniversary of this. 3 years later, when this has now been pretty thoroughly debunked as a scam, I'm not sure if it was a hoax, because they probably legitimately
an
thought
unintentional hoax, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the guys who made the initial announcement believed it was, and it was certainly worth looking into. It was worth allocating funds for and looking into, but it's now been pretty thoroughly debunked as. At least what developed into a hoax eventually. And City TV still reported on it as if none of this evidence has come to light. It's just still 3 years ago. They changed the headline. They eventually quietly changed some of their wording, but none of the media have retracted these stories and said the story was wrong, the story was false. They've just tweaked them a little bit and said now they're suspected graves. They're not even really, I'm not even sure we can call them suspected graves anymore or alleged graves anymore. At this point, they're just ground radar anomalies, Dave.
Anomalies. That's all they are, anomalies. And the City TV had one of them nasty community Facebook notes saying, actually, no, your headline and story is 100% wrong. So, but to give credit where credit's due, I think it was Terry Glavin with the National Post did an excellent series.
And he got shredded for doing
and
that.
he got
he was called
every racist name in the book.
Yeah.
So he was sort of the first mainstream media guy to maybe start backtracking a little bit, and was carved for doing so.
Yeah, and it took a lot of courage on his part to stick his neck out. I mean, we were pretty cautious before we stuck our neck out on this stuff. And we're independent, so we're going to be more bold than the legacy guys. We could afford to be, but even we were pretty cautious, and I think we were rightfully cautious in sticking our neck out because there was something worth looking into.
It's sensitive. I mean, you don't want to get in there and say this is a hoax and it didn't happen and everything else, and then a week later they exhumed the bodies as 3 children. I mean, we're just adding insult to an even already terrible situation. So no, we waited until we saw evidence or a lack thereof for some time before we really start questioning it.
We would have been as irresponsible as those who claimed it was matter-of-factly, these are unmarked graves, and if you are even skeptical of it, you're a racist. So,
well, let me ask you guys a question. Do you think maybe a future Pierre Poilievre government would stop the funding and say no more funding until you show us a body? Will we have the guts to do that?
Well, I'm not sure what there is to fund until they can show some bodies. I'm all for funding, excavation, exhuming of potential bodies in these places, and also there's going to be graveyards in some of these places. People died at these places. Many people were abused, and some people probably were, as a result, even murdered by it. But certainly not in these kinds of numbers. But there were bad conditions, as I was saying. Like tuberculosis was something we don't really have in a big way anymore. But it was a huge thing back then. It killed a lot of people, especially in cramped communal quarters like you would have had at a residential school. So right. I don't know how Poilievre addresses this, but I can't imagine him being able to look taxpayers in the eye and say, I'm going to continue to fund this stuff until you can show us some bodies.
I couldn't see new funding. If there was more, I think it would be at a point of conditional then. Okay, here's what the grant is going to be, but it's going to be for this: a backhoe, an archaeologist, a forensic investigator, an elder to supervise, fine. But not what they did before was, here's $8 million, give us a report in a few years. Well, it disappeared. Yeah. So
I'm all for funding proper investigations of this stuff because there was wrongdoing at these places, and justice should be done. And if there are bodies, they deserve a proper burial with the family.
Yep.
So, all right. A little more lighthearted as our next topic. Justin Trudeau's $12 million deer hunting trip. Now, I like deer hunting as much as the next guy, but I normally do it pretty close to home here. We got some nice areas in the foothills and whatnot. Anyone who, especially those of you watching this on Wild TV, I don't need to tell you, anyone who claims that they hunt to save money is lying. At the end of the day, by the time you eat a pound of venison, it's more expensive than getting a filet mignon at the grocery store. It's not cheap once you have factored everything in. But there's on Vancouver, I think northern Vancouver Island, there's some invasive species of deer. I think they might be from Europe or something. Somehow these European deer,
they're fallow deer.
Yeah, so it's actually on a little island off of Vancouver.
Oh yes,
so they're contained even.
Yeah. So it's not even real. Well, I guess they could swim, but it's relatively contained. But it's an invasive species. And a particularly tasty invasive species. So it should be a pretty easy problem to take care of. The province of BC could simply issue a special tag for this. They probably might even have to do a drop because there'd be so much. You could make it an open season on it. You have it like a bag limit. You do it like ducks, instead of saying 12 ducks, you got limit of 2 or 3 of these, what are they, blacktail deer or something, or No, the locals are blacktails. I forget the name of the invasive one, but I think it's from Europe or something.
Yeah.
And the federal government, which has some jurisdiction over foreign invasive species, didn't work with the BC government to just issue a special tag and have the issue probably dealt with maybe not an afternoon, maybe a weekend, because if it's an island, it's gonna be more than just a little drive. Yeah.
And you don't want hunters shooting at each other.
No.
In the crossfire.
No. But you could do this over a weekend or two, and it could be done with virtually zero. Actually, you can make it revenue positive. People will buy tags, and people pay to hunt. That's not what they did. Instead, they spent $12 million, according to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation's Access to Information Act requests, to bring in, I guess, professional hunters from the United States and New Zealand to hunt these things from helicopters, using rifles that are illegal for us to hunt with in Canada, since Trudeau banned a bunch of these guns because they look scary. And turns out they weren't even that good at it. Huge numbers of these were not the invasive species. They shot the local one. They shot the local correct deer that are supposed to be there. A bunch of them they couldn't identify. I mean, like, these guys would have faced wildlife charges. Well,
part of the reason we're typically not allowed to hunt from helicopters is it's kind of hard to distinguish the nuanced things of what you're shooting at.
Yeah, like I've never shot from a helicopter. I mean, it sounds kind of fun, but I mean, it's never occurred to me to try.
You can go to Texas. They do tourists,
pigs,
the wild boars from helicopters.
Swinemageddon. Yeah. But Dave, this information comes from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Do we have any idea why Ottawa chose to contract this out for $12 million rather than just say, hey, hunters, go kill these ones?
Not a clue. This is one of these stories, Derek, where if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. $12 million down the toilet. Didn't succeed in what they were doing. So that was just phase one. They're now about to launch phase two, where they're going to set hunters with dogs, and are actually going to set foot on the island, and they're going to hunt these things down with dogs and kill them all. So it's been a fiasco from start to finish. I don't know what a helicopter costs to rent, but it's several $1,000s an hour.
Yeah,
and all these hunters from foreign countries, because I guess you Canadian hunters aren't good enough shots.
No.
So imagine sitting there in the pub in New Zealand and you see this ad from the government of Alberta. Hey, we'll fly you up to Canada, put you in a helicopter, and give you an automatic weapon, and you can go kill things. I mean, sign me up.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Sign me up. So, good work by our friend Franco at the CTF to uncover all this stuff. And it's just a head shaker, Derek, just a head shaker.
Kurt, it's one of these things. It's like, what do you say? And we just kind of sit here shrugging like, what a bunch of idiots.
It's just an example that government can't do anything simple. They can't take a simple concept and bring it to fruition. It's like public art. Hey, we've got a new development over there. We've got some money. We want to source an artist to put up a sculpture. Great. Let's put it out to tender, get some German artist who's going to spend, $1 million to make some ugly thing and, rocks on sticks or something. And meanwhile, you've got 10 starving domestic artists say, I would have done that for a lot less than that. They can't. They can't bring themselves to it. They got to make it complicated. They've got to, it's impossible to simply solve a problem.
My daughter keeps asking me about the big blue ring every time we drive by it. She's like, Daddy, what is that thing? It looks ugly. I'm like, that's art, sweetie.
It does have a great Twitter site, though.
It used to.
It's still around. It's quite fun.
It's still there. He kind of politicizes other.
I think it's past its time.
He used to parody it quite well.
It used to be very good. And just the complexity of this in phases. Like, first they're planning this thing like it's Desert Storm. Because they got to, because it increases the cost they can bill taxpayers for it. First they're doing these helicopter assaults, send in the air cavalry. You got like Mel Gibson training the air cavalry going in there.
Theme from the Valkyries.
A Ride of the Valkyries. Hey, I'd love to hunt deer with Ride of the Valkyries with a minigun. That sounds. It's not very sporting. But
where they didn't import a bunch of hyenas or some other foreign thing to try and bring them in and naturally take care of the population. I mean, that's a government sort of idea.
Then we have to hunt the hyenas.
So that's what I mean. When they compound problems, whether it's king toads in Australia,
put a couple of grizzly bears in there.
Take care of them.
Well, actually, BC is getting overpopulated with its grizzlies now since they ended the grizzly hunt. So
that's another topic.
One thing at a time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to bring it a little closer back to Alberta here. The Alberta NDP is having its leadership race. They lost the last election. That was Rachel Notley's third kick at the can as NDP leader. She lost to Jason Kenney in 2019. She lost to Danielle Smith in 2023. She's hung up her skates. Who knows what's going to happen to her now, but the NDP are picking a new leader on, I believe, June 22nd. Listeners can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but they're going to be picking a new Naheed Nenshi, Dave.
Yes, my sources say it's basically a done deal. The former mayor of Calgary will win. Apparently, the Ganley camp is in full panic mode. Wondering what they can do. Deadline's passed for membership sales, so it's the damage has been done. If you want to say there's going to be you can't buy a whole bunch of votes in the last week, but I think it's been actually a fairly quiet campaign, Derek. We did have a story of note today on the website that both Nenshi and Sarah Hoffman were accused of lying at the Calgary debate. This goes back to the Mid-Park trailer chaos 14 years ago.
Yeah.
Where the city of Calgary came in and booted all the people out of the Midfield trailer park. Nenshi and Hoffman said they went to the park and specifically met with this one family who was having all sorts of troubles. And then the family guy saw the debate and said, "Well, wait a minute, he never met with me. She never met with me." And says they're lying. We contacted the Nenshi campaign, and they say they're sticking by their candidate statement. We haven't been able to reach Sarah Hoffman yet. She doesn't really talk to us. But yeah, other than that, there's been no slings and arrows, no fiery debates. It's sort of almost gone under the radar.
Yeah, Corey, what a contrast to the UCP leadership. But both of the different UCP leadership races we had, particularly the last one. Both races featured an outsider coming in. Danielle Smith, the outsider who, was pretty strongly against the record of the Kenney government. I'm talking about Sovereignty Act and getting away with vaccine mandates and things like that. And there was really a big anybody but Smith movement to stop her. And to be fair, they did hold her back from an easy first ballot win, which looked like she was headed towards. But it was also like a dozen candidates, many of which didn't even get a single percentage of the vote. But are you seeing anybody but Nenshi movement here, or have they just accepted it's kind of inevitable? So maybe we shouldn't fight them too hard because we're going to want good spots on the front bench of a Nenshi shadow cabinet.
I think maybe there was one, but it was quiet. It's becoming clear that this is turning into a coronation. Edmonton versus Calgary, it was Nenshi versus the established NDP, but just with the overwhelming Calgary membership sales, if Ganley wasn't raising her hand saying, "Hey, I sold a bunch of those," then it's pretty clear that his team has just done what had to be done to win in a one-member, one-vote race. But it doesn't mean this is over, or that, if it is a coronation Nenshi, that he's out of the woods by any means. He's got a party that still is going to view him as an outsider, that you're going to have some noses out of joint. And any of us who have dealt with Nenshi know too, he isn't one to smooth feathers. He's there to pick at people and tick them off. His arrogance, his first caucus meeting, unless he learns a little bit of humility, I got a feeling his lessons in party politics are going to be pretty hard at first, actually, because, nobody, especially when you feel an outsider came in and then starts talking down to you as only Nenshi can, there's going to be some grumpiness in that party. It doesn't mean they're going to fall apart. The left-wing parties stick together instead of, unlike conservatives, but I can see some
you remember
challenges.
our friend Gil McGowan withdrawing from the race out of the big labor movement in Alberta, and there was some Nenshi correspondence that came to light that basically showed he was anti-union. So that was a good chunk of that's a good chunk of the NDP support. So he is going to inherit probably what could become a more fractured party than he thought. Also interestingly, Calgary now has more NDP members than Edmonton, which is a first.
Let's pick at that one a bit. It's an interesting dynamic. Traditionally, and especially in more recent history, as we've had more of a competitive multi-party or two-party system, you had Wildrose and then the UCP, where the rural is its locked up base, and the NDP have Fortress Edmonton, and then the battle is decided in Calgary. Calgary decides then who's got it. Now, I don't think Nenshi is on his way to turning Calgary into Fortress NDP. I mean, it's still Calgary. It's not Edmonton. But yeah, I think he is probably the NDP's best bet of making Calgary as competitive as possible for the NDP in winning seats. Then this raises the question, does this weaken the NDP's hold on Edmonton? Edmonton is traditionally a less conservative city than Calgary. Still, by Canadian standards, at least on the federal level, pretty conservative, but provincially less so. But the NDP, because they've really only ever had Notley in their modern history, but even there's the leaders predating that with Brian Mason and whatnot. It was always a party of downtown, and it was the party of downtown Edmonton. Well, now they would have a leader who's Mr. Calgary. So maybe we'll start with you, Cory. Do you think this presents any opportunities for the Conservatives, not to break, to take dominance in Edmonton? I don't think that's really in the cards, but to maybe break back through and make Edmonton a more competitive battleground now that they're no longer led by an Edmontonian? Maybe
in some select constituencies around the ring of outside of Edmonton.
Well, they still own most of the ring seats.
And they might encroach a little further, because we see that the left mix tends to go the more dense the urban area, the stronger that orange color gets, whether it's in Calgary or Edmonton. So they might encroach a little, but I think a lot of Edmonton is still, though, so deeply orange, especially provincially. Even if they don't like Nenshi, they'll hold their nose and vote for him before they would vote for a Smith-led party. So
I don't see Nenshi coming in and sweeping through Calgary. Don't forget, he's got a legacy. When he left, he was very unpopular, and he lost his pet project on the new Olympic bid. He has a legacy of taxation, and look at your property taxes before and after Nenshi, and you're going to see a huge increase. He wasn't a friend of the business community with high business taxes. So he's got a lot of people against him already in Calgary. But I'll tell you who the people that are most looking forward to Nenshi being elected is the UCP. They are going to unload an attack barrage of things against Nenshi, mainly his record in Calgary that we haven't seen the likes of before.
I mean, the UCP are going to have a lot of ammunition. I think we're very quickly, probably as soon as he is officially crowned NDP leader, and then through the next campaign, roughly 3 years from now, we're going to see charts comparing your taxes in Calgary before Nenshi, your taxes in Calgary at the end of Nenshi. I mean, that's going to be a pretty powerful message to get it through to Calgarians and Albertans more broadly. But I still think he's probably their best bet. He's a relatively polished politician. He has some track record. And because he's not an old-time NDP minister or MLA, he doesn't have to quite wear the record of the Notley government, which was a fairly unpopular 4 years. He doesn't have to wear that record the way that, say, Sarah Hoffman would have to, or Kathleen Ganley would have to. He's not going to be sweeping Calgary, but he probably makes them more competitive. So I don't know. I don't think the UCP would rather fight Nenshi than, say, Hoffman or Ganley. I think he probably is the strongest candidate for the NDP, as long as he can hold it together.
Yeah, maybe they're certainly getting their guns in a row. But two questions I have is, assuming Nenshi wins, which Calgary MLA will give up their seat?
I figure CC, but
figure CC. And if Nenshi loses, will he commit to running for the NDP in the next provincial election?
Well, he's not going to lose.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't think so.
And if he did, I couldn't see him ever sitting in a second banana roll. I just, his pride wouldn't let him do it.
No, I don't think he would. CC's an interesting one because he was finance minister. He spent his first 4 years as one of the most powerful men in the cabinet, and he's been kind of riding the deep backbenches ever since.
Quiet.
He's been super quiet, and he's a downtown urban seat that the NDP would be likely to hold on to in a by-election. You get further outside the core, I mean, it'd be pretty bad for the leader to not win a by-election, for the UCP to take that seat away. That'd be crippling to someone's moral authority as leader.
He needs those two things. I mean, he needs a
safe seat.
A safe seat, and he needs, of course, somebody to open it up for him. And Edmonton might have some of those seats, but parachuting him to Edmonton would not work out well.
I think he could in the shorter term. I mean, like he probably wouldn't commit to staying in the NDP seat for the general, but I mean, Smith's by-election was Medicine Hat Brooks. She's not from Medicine Hat Brooks, but it was a conservative seat that wanted her and wanted to have the premier. So I don't think he'd have much trouble winning with an Edmonton seat. I think he'd be more comfortable with a Calgary seat.
Yeah, it wouldn't do him favors. I mean, when you're trying to win that Calgary move over those 3 years that you're sitting, it's still better if you're entrenched at home.
I think for his long term, it's better to be in Calgary because he can say, "I'm representing Calgary."
And his organization is here, right?
Yeah.
The people that got him elected mayor, people that are selling all the memberships, they're in Calgary, and not Edmonton.
It'll be interesting to see him in the legislature too. We haven't seen him perform in that role. I mean, as the leader of the opposition, it'll for political viewers, I got a feeling it'll be interesting viewing.
I'm looking forward to it because Notley got pretty tired of Notley in question period. I just couldn't watch it very often. But Smith versus Nenshi, these guys knew each other back in university. They were debating each other back as like early 20-somethings. So it'll be heated.
Yep, sparks will fly.
This is gonna have some history. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to Alberta politics. Alberta politics is so much more fun than I think most other places have got.
Boring anyway. No.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? Let's not even scripted. I'm going to add in one topic before we get to our last one here quickly in BC, because all of a sudden BC politics is interesting again, and it's been so boring for so long because you had a crazy NDP, you had a crazier Greens, and you had an ever so slightly less crazy Liberal Party that changed its name to BC United. And it was just so boring. And then Kevin Falcon, the BC United / Liberal leader, kicked 2 MLAs out, and it turned out to not be a good idea. These guys became Conservatives. And the Conservatives have completely eclipsed several times over the Liberals in the polls. The Liberals are down to like 12%. BC Conservatives are right on the heels and sometimes even tying the NDP in polls. So there's been a lot of talk about how to unite the right in BC to prevent vote split, to not just have the BC Conservatives come up, but to outright defeat the NDP. And so talks have been kind of underway. And they thought, okay, well, maybe there's not enough time to merge the party, so let's have some kind of non-compete. And the BC Liberals / United put forward a bat-shisa crazy idea. So the way the electoral math works is the seats that the BC Conservatives are the most likely to pick up are the seats currently held by the BC Liberals. The BC Liberal proposal was, you can't run in any of those seats. You could run in like downtown Vancouver where you're not going to win anyway. And so the BC Conservatives had to reject it. At the same time, the BC Conservatives can't surrender their current seats that they currently have MLAs in. So I don't think there really was a path, Corey, to any kind of successful merger or non-compete with this math. I think these parties are just going to have to fight it out, and maybe the BC Conservatives can win in their own right, maybe not.
Yeah, Rusted was on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I did ask, are you even negotiating? And I think there might be more room in plucking a few floor crossers. We saw that before with the Wild Rose too. The BC United is just looking weaker and weaker. Falcon is not, with their ridiculous things, their stubbornness, but if they get knocked low enough in the polls, I think they'll also see the lesson from Alberta. What happens if you dicker too much with splitting things? I think most conservative-minded people were just going to say that's enough. Then they're just going to gravitate around that Conservative Party. So if they're not going to have a formal negotiation, I don't think there's a hope by the looks of the way things are going. He could really gut them, though, I think, with a few seats, and they'll move forward, and it'll be like a rump left of the Unity Party for them.
And the BC Conservatives are nominating candidates fast, so it's kind of running out of time for the BC Liberals / United to come over. But these guys have got to be getting itchy in their seats, thinking things are not they're looking like a wipeout or near wipeout. They're looking at losing. I'd say the ceiling for the Liberals right now is 5 seats. That's their ceiling. Their floor is 0.
If that, I mean, it was a political Hail Mary from Falcon that I think Rustad was right to shoot down. And as you say, they've got candidates in every single riding now in BC. So it wouldn't surprise me to see the Liberals wiped off the electoral map.
I guess the big question is, can the Conservatives win? Because the BC United / Liberals are still going to hold on to some vote. 12% is not enough to be anywhere close to competitive, but it's enough to deny the Conservatives the ability to win a government in their own right. And the BC United it's only a couple points ahead of the Green Party right now. They're flirting with last place.
I don't think it can collapse lower yet. People will get pragmatic once it gets towards pushing come to shove. I think.
It's increasingly looking like that. Okay, well, we'll get to our last topic now, since I just decided to throw that one in there because all of a sudden BC got interesting. So we've got the war in Gaza going on since the October 7th attacks, and the Netanyahu government is not settling for just giving Hamas a bloody nose. Their intent to destroy it. They will end Hamas here, and that's proved to be fairly controversial, especially as they move on Rafah, the city in southern Gaza, full of refugees. I think they tried to evacuate like 1 million refugees out of there before the assault began. But anyway, it's a tough situation. But anyway, the Trudeau government here said we're going to take 1,000 refugees from Gaza. Now, you got to be careful with refugees from this part of the world, because guess what? You know what Rafah's full of right now? Hamas. And no doubt some of them are going to try and come through. Both active Hamas militants and terrorists, and even just Hamas sympathizers. And I don't even think we want Hamas sympathizers coming here. But then they're
already here.
They're literally parked in front of Parliament Hill right now as we speak.
Yes.
Yeah,
we don't need more of them.
Yeah, we don't need more Hamas sympathizers in Canada, I think we should say. They upped this from 1,000 to 5,000, and then from 5,000 individuals to 5,000 families. Now, when I say refugees, I guess those of you not watching, if you can't see me, I'm using finger quotes when I say refugees, because I have a strong suspicion this will be similar to the, quote, Syrian refugee crisis, when a bunch of young men in their early 20s show up without women, without children, and they show up, many of them having never even been to Syria, let alone being Syrians. And it was a problem here, but it's particularly a problem in Europe, where Angela Merkel just essentially had the whole continent washed over with people that should have been declared illegal. And those people turned out to be problematic. You had mass gang rapes in cities in the New Year's following this influx of people. I guess the good news from Trudeau moving it from 5,000 refugees to 5,000 families is most of these guys aren't bringing their families with them. They're leaving the women and children behind and just coming on their own, Dave. So it might not actually be much more than 5,000.
Yeah, I mean, who knows if the Liberals don't increase it to 10,000. It seems to be a moving target. Also, very few of them are able to get out at the moment. Israeli government obviously controls who comes and who goes out of Rafah, and they're not letting too many.
So does Egypt.
And Egypt,
but Egypt is even harder on not letting anyone through. Exactly. They don't like that border opening up.
No, they don't want any Palestinian refugees there. So at the end of the day, remains to be seen how many actually come, and. If 5,000 people each bring each 5,000 families each come with a family of 4, that's 20,000 people right there. But you're right.
Well, a family of 4 would actually be a small family.
Yes, yeah. But you're right. It'll be, as we've seen in Europe, it'll be single young military-aged men, and not only Germany, but you've seen what it's done to other countries in Europe. Stockholm in particular has no go zones for police already in high density Muslim areas, and it's just being handled a mess through Europe, and apparently Justin Trudeau wants to import it here too.
And by being so haphazard with refugee policy and immigration policy, Cory, it creates a backlash against otherwise good immigration and refugee policy. Like, you see what's happened. Geert Wilders is about to be sworn in as the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. The Netherlands, historically the most liberal, anything goes country in Europe for the last 100 years, has just elected Geert frickin' Wilders as their prime minister. And that is by far the biggest reason is unchecked open borders, allowing people in who don't share the values of your country and who try to impose the values of the old country on the new. And that's why you've got the friendly little Dutch taking off their wooden shoes and throwing them.
And it's also front and center in the ongoing British election, which party can stop the migrant boats from coming across the channel. So it's a huge political issue every day in Europe.
We should worry about, right now, we're already dealing with an immigration crisis with too many people legally coming over, regular immigrants, temporary immigrants, other refugees. We're having difficulty housing them. We're having difficulty integrating them. Taking in thousands more from what is one of the most dysfunctional hornet's nests on the planet right now, to be blunt, is stupid. I feel for it. There's some people in dire straits. I mean, the military operation has kettled them down in the bottom. There are some innocent people stuck in that crossfire. But you know what? We've done a lot and we've done enough. If you really want to do something, lobby to Egypt, to Jordan, to Lebanon, to bring them in.
What did you say on your show today? 1.3 million immigrants this year?
In 2023, 1.3.
And they have nowhere to live. There's no housing.
So this is just ridiculous to reach out for more. It's virtue signaling in a dangerous way.
Yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, good show. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining us on the pipeline today. Remember, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, you really need to be. The Western Standard is one of the very, very few and very last media outlets in Canada that does not take the federal government's media bailout. We are funded by advertising and from people willing to step up and put a little bit of money down to support the work we do. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content by becoming a member. Go to westernstandard.news right now and click on membership to support the work we do and support one of the last independent media left in Canada. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us your time today, and God bless. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99